Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Pokemon Go, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your order using that code Omnipoke. For today's video, we're continuing with some World Championship deck spotlights. This time it's going to be the Origin Form Dialga VSTAR. Very interesting combo-based archetype that plays quite differently to most of the other top decks in the game. So let's jump into that general strategy. And that is that we're trying to amass a pretty large hand size to try and get a big Star Chronos V-Star power attack going by accessing a ton of metal energies and putting them in the discard pile thanks to concealed cards from Greninja as well as Scoop Up Net, trying to have additional discards with Trekking Shoes, Quick and Ultra Balls, all being found with the help of Mew here and there in those opening stages. We're trying to get this pretty expensive attack cost rolling as quickly in some instances as turn 2 if you're able to find enough metal sources and sometimes even Raihan for acceleration. You can use the Star Chronos and deal 220 damage and take another turn. And that really is an oppressive effect where you can deny the opponent any reaction, and you can, in some instances, wipe a huge portion of their board out all in one go, especially if you can use the Avery supporter on the turn you Star Chronos. You're already limiting their bench, then you're, in many instances, taking a knockout with Star Chronos, and then ideally you're using Boss's Orders or Cross Switcher to take another knockout the following turn with Metal Blast, which has 40 plus 40 more for each metal energy attached to this Pokemon. So adding more on top of this allows the Dialga really to have ridiculous damage output and should be enough to deal with other V-Star Pokemon or regular Vs just chilling on their bench if you're able to score that KO. In the same breath, you can also use Metal Blast just for chip damage in some of the opening stages if you think it's relevant to hit into V-Stars if they have already evolved from the opponent. For example, if you're the player going second, oftentimes you'll be having to Metal Blast, then Chronos, then Metal Blast again. And it sounds a little bit difficult, but it certainly can be done. You can tank a hit with your nice 280 hit points to fall back on. And in some instances, this one Dialga can carry you through that sort of wave of tempo that you gain from the Star Chronos, can allow you to take all 6 prize cards in a lot of instances, especially when the opponent is only able to attack with 2 prizes. You can find it very easy. And in other instances, you can fall back on cards like Zacian as your final sort of attack of the game once the Dialga is knocked out, and that can sort of be your finishing play. So yeah, very interesting combo deck. We're trying to dig pretty deep with a lot of concealed card usage from Greninja and all of these item cards to dig into the deck as quickly as possible, as well as Crobatting and using draw supporters. You can get pretty far in and have a ton of sources. This deck is obviously much stronger if you're the player going first. First of all, it means that Star Chronos can knock out V Pokemon before they evolve into higher hit point V Stars, but also it means that you can proactively play your metal sources on that turn 1 of the game, knowing that much more likely your Origin Form Dialga V before it's V-Starred is safe for a turn. So you can turn attach, you can get a couple sources on, and even if you get hit with a Marnie, you'll have instantly played down a lot of these cards. And then turn 2, you can once again continue to get an extra manual attachment down and just try and find more sources to get you over the line. Whereas if you are the player going second, it's risky for you to proactively play your sources because the opponent can simply gust up the Dialga before it V-Stars and take a knockout on it. Or they can, if you choose to hold all your sources, they can Marnie you, and it's much more disruptive because you then have to re-find a lot of these resources. So pretty intricate and interesting deck to know when to push with your draw potential and how far to cycle with the deck. And that's really the main thing to learn about this archetype, I would say. Let's have a look at the matchup spread. Bit of an interesting one, really. Starting off with the very favourables, Stonejourner is clearly a very favourable because they can't heal when you Star Chronos, so you just two-shot their one guy and then they basically instantly lose. Reggies actually struggle because you play Avery in addition to the Star Chronos, and you normally remove so many Reggies all in one go that they're scrabbling around all over again to try and reassemble their pieces by having to find ordinary rods, as well as a ton of ball search, as well as capture energies, which they've already had to jump through those hoops in the opening stages, so doing it again is very awkward. The Urshifu as well seems pretty favourable for you, just because they don't put much pressure on the Dialga, so you're pretty safe to do what you want, and they don't play much hand disruption. and you also seem to be okay into the Zoroark deck. I think it's a similar reason where you have the Avery as well as are able to Star Kronos and take multiple knockouts and really deplete a board that wants to have, you know, a ton of Cincino in play, a ton of Zorua in play, that sort of thing. For slightly favourables, we have Arc Peak. I think their natural damage output is so low that you can be pretty aggressive with your Dialga and try and aggressively sorcerer a lot of the time. I think your biggest hiccup into a lot of these Arc decks will be them just hitting an early path against you. So that's a small thing to be concerned about here. Arc Mewtwo also seems pretty favourable. This list in particular plays a very thin bench because oftentimes it only plays Arceus and then the Mewtwo itself. So that is naturally going to be very good and plays into the Chronos game plan very nicely. Ice Rider you can hit for weakness, of course, so it's almost a non-option for them, and it renders a good part of their deck a lot less useful. And Mewtwo Miltank is surprisingly slightly favourable. I think this can involve you playing sometimes up to 2 Marnies, as well as trying to Chronos on that same moment, where you can take multiple Snorlax out in the same turn, or you can save your Star Chronos so they basically can never put their Mewtwo into play, and then as long as you have a 1-prize attacking threat to get through Miltanks, you can checkmate the Mewtwo, and even if it never comes into play, because you can just Chronos KO on future turns, and you have a lot of energy recovery, of course, with Sources and with Training Court, so it's hard for the Mewtwo player to disrupt your energies in that regard. The Arc Dura seems pretty even, which is an interesting one. I think they just have that little extra element of healing. They have big charms that can hurt your math here and there, and they also come packing a very high count of Marnies to keep you pretty honest. The Arc Gyarados also seems relatively even. You're not really disrupted by the capsule too much, other than the fact that if you're not able to Chronos into the Gyarados, you're then allowing a Get Angry to happen potentially as well. So again, something to bear in mind. They again come packing for Path in a lot of instances, which is another small headache for the deck. Lunar Rock is seeming pretty even. I think again, similar to these other 1-prize decks, the Avery in conjunction with the Chronos is gonna what really swings the game in your favor. I think in some instances, it is hard to foresee the Dialga going the distance, as long as the opponent can re-establish their board, but it's how quickly they can re-establish all their Soul Rocks that they've had to discard with a ton of Averys coming at them. The Rapid Mally, again, Avery is your best friend here. It's really helping you beat some of these 1-prize decks because you really do deplete a board with a Avery Chronos combo. Some of your unfavourables, Arc Intel seems mildly unfavoured, which is a little bit awkward. Of course, they have good tutoring for their Marnie Path combinations, which is a big fear factor for you. And because they play Water Energy, unlike some of these other Arc variants, they can weave in 1-prize attackers to help finish off a Dialga as well, which is a small concern, so that they're not just completely floundering as soon as their Arceus are taken out of play. The Blissey Miltank as well can be a little bit unfavourable. Getting through a number of Miltanks can be awkward. Of course, they can flirt between attacking with Blissey and Miltank to get through your own Miltank answer, and then once your Miltank answer is knocked out, they just put a Miltank into play and then you lose the game. So if they aggressively Blissey in the opening stages, they should be able to get around you. A bit of a dance between their 2 attackers, but as long as they play enough Miltanks, they should get over the line. Genesect Mew as well also seems a little bit awkward. Obviously, this is one of the decks that can capitalize and gust up Dialgas pretty quickly. Of course, you're also putting things like Crobat into play, so you normally offer up lots of 2-prize Pokemon for them to do a boss game plan, and they can simply outrace you if they essentially take the first prize on a Mew. Even that 1 prize can be pretty helpful for them, or as well, of course, if they are using ropes and whatnot, they can get the better of you in those opening stages. Of course, the Avery can help you a little bit here, but you're allowing them to re-establish their board and constantly have draw at their disposal, which is always a big risk. The Turbo Palkia seems slightly unfavourable as well. The Inteleon build seems worse between the two, and I think that's mostly because the Turbo build is more likely to play Starmie V, which is a huge worry, and the Inteleon part of the deck is a 1-prize attacking threat, which is also a big worry. I was kind of surprised to see how negative this was. It's a below 40% matchup for you, which is pretty unfavourable, I'd say. And I would have thought it would be closer, but I guess Palkia Intel is consistent enough and has enough 1-prize threats, even using that Radiant Greninja aggressively to deal with your maybe set up damage on Dialga whilst taking a 1-prize KO, or just setting up double Dialga with the Greninja is already enough for them to get ahead in the game and force you to have really great combos as well as boss's orders. And if you're using boss's orders, you're not using Avery, which then keeps their board space wide enough, etc. So they make you draw pretty well, and they can aggressively punish your engine, which I think is a big problem for you. It's difficult for Dialga to not go wide on the board, of course, because you're using a lot of Mews, you're using your own Radiant Greninja, you're using Crobat, and you're also sometimes using Zacian as well. So a bit of a worry there. You play into Palkia's hands quite well. And then what I would say is the worst matchup, and the data suggests this as well, the Inteleon one prize box is, of course, a worry. Yes, you have that Avery you can try and do, but it only takes, a couple shady deals for them to get a Charizard response KOing you as a one prizer, and they can rinse and repeat this Charizard very easily. And there's not much you can do about that, because they're just going to one-shot you with their one prizer a couple times over, and then you're out of attackers, essentially. And that's all she wrote for the game, so that is definitely your worst matchup to come up against. Onto a skeleton list then, we are going to have just a 2-2 line of the Dialga and the Zacian. The one of Zacian seems really counterintuitive and strange, but although this deck can lose an actual prize race, normally it runs out of attackers before it runs out of prize cards, because you commit so many energy to your Dialga VSTAR. It's normally, 6, 7 energy that can easily go onto this Dialga, and then also having the Zacian in here as well as like your backup attacking option, I guess you could say. That's all you have, and you put all your eggs into these two baskets, essentially, and if you're out, you're out, and you're simply just not attacking, or you're using your regular V just to get some energy out of the discard pile to try and recoup some of that energy that you've lost. But you front load all of this tempo into your initial Dialga V-Star, and if that's not enough, you just shrug and say that's the game. So yeah, kind of strange that you have such low counts of your Pokemon, but thanks to the Hisuian Heavy, you should be able to get at least one Dialga rolling pretty easily here. You have that high Mew count. It's obviously the best lead for you to Mysterious Tail towards all of these turbo item cards. Of course, getting Radiant Greninja into play as early as possible is going to be a big deal. So hitting VIP passes, Quick Balls, Ultra Balls, all going to be very helpful here. Crobat as well can be used aggressively to try and draw cards in those opening stages. The Ball Search has added upside of discarding energy as you go. Same thing can be said for the shoes. You have sources, of course, which you have to be careful with, of course. You don't want to overplay them if your Dialga is in danger of being gusted and KO'd. So you kind of have to save these as much as possible. The one Raihan in here acts as like a 5th Saucer, which protects you a little bit against prizing, and also gives you extra access to specific cards when you are trying to look for that combo. For example, if you spend your first turn Mysterious Tailing up and benching a couple Dialga and ending your turn on Intrepid Sword, even if they go for a boss KO on Bat or Zacian or even one of your 2 Dialga, you then can go popping off with Raihan to then find your next Sorcerer and really get yourself going. So this can be a great card to help you hit that combo in the first place. What else can be said really about this? The Avery, I've already mentioned a ton in the matchup overview, that it is a really core card and one of your most important cards to have in the deck, actually, to help out against all these one prize matchups, as well as disrupt Inteleon engines. So it is a core concept, I would say, of the Dialga, and I really don't see a way to cut down from the 2 copies. You actually keep a low count of supporters, because once again, you front load all of this tempo into just completely trouncing the opponent, essentially, over the first, 3 turns. You spend 2 turns setting up, then you're chronosing, then you're taking another KO, and the opponent's board is hopefully depleted and in a really weird state, essentially, at that stage in the game, where the Dialga can essentially go unopposed and just take knockouts, or you can use that Zacian again as your final option. And it means that you expect to have, 4 or 5 turn games, and because you have so much cycle with the Greninja and the nets to reuse the concealed cards, you don't need many physical supporters in the deck. You'd much rather have a high count of item cards so you can see more off of the Mysterious Tail throughout the game. So yeah, pretty straightforward. 52 here. The one thing I would say is, of course, is that we are going to need some more gusting than the 1 copy of Boss's Orders. So the great debate becomes whether you go higher on that Boss's Orders count or if you want to go to Cross Switcher. Cross Switcher allows you to play it in combination with Avery, which can really be a nice combination against a number of decks that have 1 and 2 prize attacking threats. Like I mentioned, the Palkia matchup is one of your more awkward ones, and I think a lot of the time it's because you never want to star Kronos into a 1 prizer. It's really, really bad to do this. It can really slow you down. So if the Palkia is aggressively using Radiant Greninja or using Inteleon, you're going to want to Avery and cross-switcher them, because otherwise you're in a really bad spot. So the cross-switcher specifically, I think, helps the Palkia matchup, but is also just allowing you to have the massive wombo combo whilst drawing cards with your supporter and hitting them like the best target. So they're annoying in that they take up more space than the boss's orders, of course, and you have to find 2 in one go to get the activation of this, but it allows you to combine it with Avery, which I think is such a big deal, and it also allows you to combine it with Raihan. I think it actually makes Raihan a stronger card in the deck anyway, because the Raihan can then piece out your other cross-switcher as well if you're just holding on to one at the right time. So, yeah, I'm personally on cross-switcher camp. I believe it's stronger, specifically into Palkia, which is why I want them in the first place. But I think they make more sense in terms of having the strongest 2 turns possible in a row. The cross-switchers probably make that happen the most often. So I personally like the cross-switchers, but there are merits to having bosses, because then it just allows you to physically have more switches, ropes, and possibly just more draw supporters like Birdkeeper, which essentially just gives you more guaranteed pivots between your Mews compared to the cross-switchers, which will only happen like once or twice, of course. So, and you can put yourself in positions which are weird with cross-switcher, where you're hoping that a Mysterious Tail gets you your second cross-switcher. If it does, you're going to pop off and destroy the opponent. If it doesn't, and like if it whiffs, you end up having to pass the turn. Whereas the rope switches and Birdkeepers, they're much more of a known quantity, and you know exactly what you can do that turn. You know what's in your range a lot more clearly, I would say. So a bit more gambling elements with the cross-switcher, perhaps, in terms of how you play out your turn, rather than having these guarantees. The Birdkeeper can come with a mini package as well if you want to play Rowlet, and even there's a Starly you can use to cherry pick a couple cards from your deck for free as well. It's been a mini package played in a couple of these combo Dialga lists. And it essentially just makes the Birdkeeper more powerful. The Rowlet can be used to take 1 and 2 prizes a little bit easier, aggressively, rather than just ending your turn on Intrepid Sword or ending your turn just on a Mysterious Tail, like an extra one. You can get some damage into play, and again, this can be used proactively to put onto Vs that could evolve into V-Stars, which is obviously very helpful for you, or can just take out 1 prize Pokemon if you really deem it necessary and expect that to be part of your prize map. So I think it's a pretty solid option to think about, certainly. There are great utilities to the Rowlet. The Stadium is kind of the biggest debate. We, of course, get Pokestop from Pokemon Go, and it seems to be a match made in heaven for a turbo variant, where you naturally play a high density of item cards, of course. You also have upside of discarding your Metal Energy, of course. So there are benefits to the Pokestop, but of course it comes with that risk that you could discard 2 Dialga V-Stars, and then you're in a lot of trouble. Even if you add like a 3rd Dialga V-Star or add in an Ordinary Rod or something, it just gets that much more awkward for you, and you never really feel that confident. So the Pokestop really just can't slot into the deck, I guess you could say, quite as easily as you'd like. I don't think I'd ever play more than 1 Pokestop anyway, because Training Court naturally has such insane synergy with Radiant Greninja and the heavy net engine that I think that is my personal preference right now. I feel it's just safer overall, just to make sure that you can get multiple activations of Greninja throughout the entire game. But if you want to deconstruct the deck and try Pokestop that little bit more, it can get you a ton of card advantage, and that's also what the deck is really looking towards, so I can't really knock it too much. And then finally in the top right we have a sort of 1 prize attacking threat to deal with Miltank. I'm personally respecting Miltank for Worlds. You've seen how Miltank can perform if it's not respected. I mean, Bliss Tank got 2nd at a regional, and Mewtwo Miltank got top 4 at NAIC, so I would be respecting Miltank if it was myself going into Worlds. I think Dialga's probably the best option here, thanks to that first attack Temporal Backflow. You can just get a card from the discard pile into the hand, and this can be a bailout option here and there, where you can get back like a cross switcher if you prized one of them and still have 3 floating around in the deck, and you can get that extra Gust activation. It can get back just key cards essentially for you, and allows you to skimp out on certain slots and get extra uses. At the same time, of course, Metal Blast being the most important factor here as being the attack that gets through Miltank, and it can scale above like Cape or Big Charm math as well, which I think makes it slightly better than the option of like Duraludon, for example, as another basic 1 prize attacking threat. So I do feel like the Celebrations Dialga is the best include here. So let's have a look at a cross-switcher 60. Like I said, it's my personal preference. It's how I've played most of my games of Origin Form Dialga. So it makes the most sense for me. The only slots I've added from the skeleton is I've gone in with the 4 cross-switcher. 2 training core is kind of where I see most of the lists landing, but for me it's a little bit scary as well, because I would like a 3rd copy because there's a huge amount of paths still in the meta game. So that's 6 of the spaces. Then we have 1 Bird Keeper as well as the Dialga coming in, the 1 prize attacking threat to help deal with Miltank. Now, like I said, the Blissey Miltank is a little bit awkward, but you're going to be much, much stronger against the controlling Mewtwo Miltank with this this one-of include. And it feels like a matchup worth respecting, I think, going into Worlds. And then for a heavy boss approach, if you think it's going to be better just to have more space dedicated to draw potentially, now I've gone 3 boss, 2 Bird Keeper, as well as 1 rope as the changes from the previous list, still having those courts, still having the Dialga in here. It means that you have more pivoting, which means more Mysterious Tail action going on, which is fantastic. Just to dip deeper into the deck to try and hit these sources. They are the key component as quickly as possible to get that Star Chronos rolling, and everything else is the same. Of course, Bird Keeper does have that small conflicting aspect with Avery, where Avery allows you to be more disruptive than the Bird Keeper, but the Bird Keeper is kind of more reliable, I guess you could say, at making the combo happen, because it gives you not only the 3 cards that an Avery would, but also potentially an extra dig at 6 cards, where you can tail 1 more time with a Mew here and there. So that's a small upgrade, I would say, compared to having those cross switches. But again, playing more supporters conflicts with the other ones. You know, you can't Keeper and Boss on the same turn, you can't Avery and Keeper or whatever, so you're kind of more pigeonholed and have to decide early at which supporter you're playing on the turn, whereas the cross switches allows you to dream a dream. You're allowed to play an Avery in the early stages of your turn, knowing that you're seeing more cards and getting towards your combo in the first place. And if things go well, maybe you're cross-switching on the same turn. So you're really going greedy with the cross-switches, I would say. But it can churn out the most powerful turns possible. Whereas this one is, you know, still able to come up with some crazy turns, but it's kind of more difficult to do a Chronos with a Gust because you're not seeing 3 extra cards on the same turn you use Boss. But it is more reliable at getting a Gust on the turn using Metal Blast. So it's a back and forth that you have to weigh up personally. On to some closing thoughts with the deck. I think sequencing is actually the main thing you need to learn. Even solitairing your games, just goldfishing at home, where you're shuffling up, looking at your opening hand, pretending that you can just, you know, go first or whatever, see what you do with your hand, then do the same thing for a handful of games when you're going second, and just seeing where your hand takes you. How deep can you get? What can you accumulate? How bad would it be if you got Marnied as the player going second? These are things you can do just against yourself, because a lot of archetypes, you're going to be doing the same thing. You know, it's only really against like Arceus players where you don't feel the need to put down double Dialga. There'll be like Palkia players where you probably do want double Dialga. This is, of course, if you're the player going second. Mewtwo, you need double Dialga. These are really the only things that are different, right? How does your board space look? Can it be an extra Mew? Can it be an extra Chromat space for turn 2 rather than, you know, you can use one on turn 1 and on turn 2 if you're only using 1 Dialga? Do you feel like Zacian is worth weaving in? These are the things that you want to debate. But this can mostly be done just by goldfishing, and the better you get with sequencing, the better your win rate is going to be just in general, because this is a very sequence heavy deck. Seeing the most amount of cards and digging towards key outs is going to be what's important. Knowing when to use the Mew first, or use the Shoes first, or use the Greninja first. These are all things you have to rationalize with yourself to see what parts of the combo you're going for. Certain instances where you have to commit to playing a supporter card before you know the entire outcome of your turn, for example. These are all things that you need to get quite experienced at, because that's going to be how you get the highest win rate out of this deck. One other great thing about this deck is that you have a really good grasp of where you are in the game. You know, if someone's hit you with a path turn 1, you don't have a bounce, and your turn is attach pass, you know you're in bad shape, and you can scoop quickly when needed. And when you're popping off, you've done your Star Chronos, you know that probably in like 2 turns time, you have a very easy prize map to win the game. Sort of 3 turns at most after a Star Chronos, I think you're winning as Dialga. And although you have a lot of actions in the opening turns, turns like 3, 4, 5, if it goes that long, it's essentially attach attack, and you have no other plays. Like sometimes you'll use a Greninja, sometimes you'll play a supporter card, but you know, I would be amazed if you do more than like 4 actions a turn on turns 3, 4, 5 as Dialga. It just doesn't happen. You've done all your plays. You have like 6 cards left in deck and like 2 supporters left to play. That's really it. So you know when you're ahead, you know when you're behind, and that's really important at Worlds when you want to win 2 out of 3s in 50 minutes, of course. The bad things about the deck is that you are very reliant on draws. I feel like once you get the sequencing down, that's all the control you have over Dialga's performance. Like, yes, you want to hit better matchups than others, trying to avoid that Palkia here and there so you can have less optimal hands and still get a Kronos going. You get more access to Mew and whatnot, but what matters more than anything else, and I think like compare this to Inteleon engines, where yes, of course, you want to get your turn 1 benched V and get an attachment down in the best case scenarios. These decks still have comeback potential where they have their, you know, Roxanne path and this, that, and the other to try and disrupt an opponent. Dialga is all in, and every time you spend an extra turn doing whatever you're doing, that can give the opponent relevant damage into your main threat, or it can allow them to set up a backup attacker. It can allow them to establish more of a board, and that's very scary. So you're constantly on a clock with Dialga, which I guess is pretty thematic, but it really pressurizes you to have good hands and draw well. That's how the deck is built, of course, but you really, really feel out of control of your own destiny if your opening hands are just slow and in an awkward sequence. So that's something that is potentially feeling a little bit awkward for me, where it feels like you're not truly in control of your destiny when you play Dialga. Dialga kind of plays you rather than you play the deck, which is really strange to say, but that's how it feels. And then finally, having a tough Palkia matchup and also having sketchy moments against Path is a worry, right? Some people are put off playing Mew just because Path is such an issue, and I think the same can really be said for Dialga, where you are very reliant on that Radiant Greninja, you're very reliant on Crobat, and not having those at your disposal is very, very awkward for you. If you really want to, you can play Pumpkaboo in the list. I haven't seen that much in Dialga at all, but if you're very afraid of early Path, that can be an option for you. But it's just a constant concern that I would have with the deck, and another reason that you'd really want to go first. I feel like Dialga wants to go first more than any other deck in the game, because its win rate is drastically different based on going first and second. And also, of course, Palkia are going to be one of the most popular decks in the room, and naturally being a little bit unfavoured definitely gives me the shivers. So let me know what you think about Dialga. How are you playing it? Do you like cross switches? Do you like boss? What key tech cards are you playing? Do you think it's going to be a presence in day 1 or day 2 of Worlds? Or do you think that matchup spread is a little bit too scary? I'll hear it all down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.